Welcome, and good morning, dear family, friends, and colleagues. My name is Deborah Moore, and I have been Ellen's teaching assistant for this semester's narrative theater class. Thank you for joining us this morning. As we move into the season of festivities, we appreciate your coming to hear our students' stories about death and dying. It is not so in every culture, but in Western culture, we definitely shy away from this subject. Birth is a time for celebration and rejoicing, but death is cloaked in euphemisms and mystery. Of course, truly, it is the greatest mystery, the best kept secret. What happens to us? None of us can say for sure. It has been a pleasure, however, to face the biggest question with Ellen and the 7 students here today. May their stories be a tribute to all our ancestors and loved ones who have gone before us and who now know the answer to the big question. As the old year dies away, and soon the solstice will mark the longest night of the year, our winter holidays become, in part, a celebration of the inevitable return of the light. The passing of the seasons becomes a metaphor for life that is repeated for us over and over again. May we all learn to embrace endings, mysteries, and then the return of the light, just as we rejoice in the newness of spring, the fullness of long summer days, of work well done in the fall, and darkness, rest, and fallowness in winter.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Ellen Reid, and when people ask me what I teach, I'm really worried about falling down. When people ask me what I teach and I say narrative theater, I sometimes get blank stares. But when I say narrative theater is storytelling, it's like, oh, right, storytelling. Everybody knows about storytelling. Storytelling is the oldest art form. It could be said that all art is storytelling. Plays, certainly, theater, certainly, but what about songs, music? What about dance? What about stand-up comedy? Even visual arts. Did I leave anything out? Poetry, storytelling. It's all storytelling. So every story needs to have a theme. And I chose, for this particular semester of narrative theater, I chose the theme of death and dying. Why would I do that? Well, a few reasons. One is that in our culture, death and dying are like, there's denial about it until it actually happens. Whereas in other cultures, death and dying are embraced just like birth is embraced. If you look at it this way, if birth is over here, and if you're lucky enough, death is like over here, you move along the continuum, and you get to a certain point, and you say, oh, it's on its way anytime now. So for me, because I turn 80 this year, and for people of my generation, death is trending. Okay. So we've decided to do our stories about death and dying. I gave 10 storytelling assignments over the course of the semester. 7 of them are represented here this morning. I will tell you what the assignments were, and they will tell you their stories based on those assignments. I want to say, though, that you will hear some trigger words, words that thankfully in our culture, in our time, would be anathema, but they are accurate for the culture and time that they depict. Assignment number 1. Your first experience with death. Paulette.
Christmas, 1961. Dried, flattened frogs in the dirt road. A tiny kitten, eyes still closed, bloody bites on its neck. Scaling and gutting bass caught in Granddaddy's pond. Skinning rabbits and squirrels that Daddy shot. I lived on a farm, and death and life was all around me. When Mama wanted a chicken to fry for supper, I chased them around the chicken pen with a hooked wire coat hanger. When I snared one's leg, I snatched the hen up and took it to Mama, who was ready at the chopping block with her hatchet. When a neighbor's baby was stillborn, we took the mother a piece of pink fabric to line the small homemade coffin, walking down the dark road with a lantern because Mama didn't drive and Daddy was at work. The neighbor's house was dark too, lit only by candles and kerosene. They didn't have electricity. Both Mama and Daddy had many relatives who were old. On Sundays, we regularly visited the hospital and nursing homes and often went to funerals. Mama religiously turned the radio to WOXF, Oxford, at noon to hear Hart Curl read the obituary column. Death was all around us. As long as I can remember, Grandma, Mama's mother, was sick. She was bedridden, and Mama, the oldest child, and her sister, my Aunt Pat, the youngest, helped Granddaddy take care of her. Grandma had Parkinson's, for which there was no effective treatment 70 years ago. They took care of her at home, and then one week she had to go to Watts Hospital in Durham. We didn't go to see her during the week. Remember, Mama couldn't drive yet. We went to church on Sunday, so we wouldn't miss getting our perfect attendance Sunday school pins, and then to the hospital. Grandma had just died when we got there. I don't think Mama ever forgave herself for not being there with Grandma. We spent the rest of the afternoon at the hospital. I know that's true because it was dark as we drove home. I was standing in the back seat of our 1955 green Chevrolet Bel Air, looking over at the dashboard lights, and I asked, "Will Santa Claus still come?" I knew it was a risky question, and my 15-year-old sister rolled her eyes at me. Mama looked over at Daddy. After a moment, she said, "Well, I suppose he might as well." It was Christmas Eve, 1961. My 10-year-old self sat down, reassured. Death was in our family, but life would go on.
Mary.
The newspaper version of the accident. A well-known local woman, Selma Amelia Cox, sustained major injuries in a car accident on Route 6 on April 10, 1955 at 10:15 a.m. Mrs. Cox, 49, had been traveling from the village of Ludlow, Pennsylvania, to the nearby town of Kane, Pennsylvania, when an oncoming car crossed the center line and hit Mrs. Cox's vehicle head-on. Mary Cox, her 8-year-old daughter, was a passenger in the car. She sustained minor injuries. Mrs. Cox was taken to Hammond Hospital in Kane by ambulance. She was subsequently moved to Mercyhurst Hospital in Erie, Pennsylvania, where she was treated for facial lacerations, broken ribs, and head injuries. Mrs. Cox died the next day of a punctured lung. Mary Cox was treated for a concussion and multiple bruises at Hammond Hospital in Kane. She was released on April 10th. The driver of the oncoming car was Jason Johnson from Corey, Pennsylvania. Mr. Johnson, 16 years old, was not injured in the accident. Services for Mrs. Cox will be at the family home in Ludlow, Pennsylvania on April 15th at 3 p.m. Pastor Nelson from the Moriah Lutheran Church in Ludlow will officiate. Surviving Mrs. Cox are husband Walter S. Cox, son John, and daughter Mary. Mrs. Cox will be laid to rest in the family mausoleum at the Forest Lawn Cemetery in Kane, Pennsylvania, immediately following the services. My experience of the accident. I was going to Kane with my mother for my tap dance lesson. I was really excited because I would be seeing the costumes made for me and Connie. The lady said it was green with sequins, and Connie and I were to perform together. We were halfway to Kane. I was riding in the front seat, looking out the back window of our big, beautiful Buick. The next thing I saw were my glasses swinging from the door handle. My mother was slumped over the steering wheel, and there was a lot of blood. I don't remember much about what happened next, except I still hear the voices of the ambulance men. They were saying how bad things were. Then I was at the hospital in Kane. My mother was in a different room, but she was unconscious and I was not allowed in the room. Then the doctor sent her to the Erie Hospital, and I never saw her again. Alive, I mean. I saw the really long black car from a long way off, like an ant making its way back into its hill. The car climbed the steep hill to reach the driveway. It seemed like a very long time before it arrived there. Then 6 men carried a metal box from the car along the red brick sidewalk all the way into the house. They called the box a casket. They put the casket on legs so it was higher. And then they opened it. There was my mother. She looked the same, only different. Lots of people came to our house. They told me that my mother died to save my life. They said she kept me from getting hurt by putting her arm around me. In a few days, the long black car came again and took her to the cemetery. After that, our family and the people in town just called it the accident.
Elizabeth.
Discovering family history. Next door to the 20-acre junkyard where my family lived until I was about 9 years old, there was a trailer park. One of the only times that I ever went to play with other kids at that trailer park was when I was 6 years old and my brother, who was 18 months younger than me, went. And there were big piles of dirt and gravel, and there were a few boys, and one of them would yell out a command, and the other boys would go, "Heil Hitler!" and then do what they were told. That night at the dinner table, I was sitting right across the table from my dad, and someone asked to pass the peas, and I stood up, reached for the peas, and shouted, "Heil Hitler!" My father stood up, smacked me so hard that I hit the wall a few feet behind me, and slid to the floor. My mother grabbed me by the arm, dragged me down the hall, threw me on my bed, and said, "Don't you ever say that again. Hitler killed your father's whole family." Then she returned to the dining room, leaving me really so confused. Not only did I think I'd just been saying, "Yes, sir," but I was picturing some guy with a knife or a gun, and how did neighbor kids know about it and not me? And after the reaction I'd gotten from both parents, I was not about to start bringing it up again by asking questions. It wasn't until a couple of years later, when they showed a movie about the liberation of Auschwitz to our Sunday school class. Yes, a group of second and third graders got to watch the bulldozing of bunches of practically skeletal dead bodies, that I finally understood who Hitler was and anything about the Holocaust. Other than my Aunt Hannah, my dad's sister, and a few other cousins around the Detroit area, my father's family was never really mentioned. I'd wondered why I only had one Bubby and Zadie, Yiddish for Bubby, Grandma, and Grandpa, and that was my mom's parents. The only time I'd ever heard anything about those others was why both my older sister's name was Lana and Aunt Hannah's oldest daughter's name was also Lana. It had been their mother's name. It was many years later before I learned that my dad also had two younger brothers that he had tried to take with him when he fled to Russia with the retreating Russian army as the Nazis were invading Poland, now Ukraine, where he had been born and raised. His parents' reply was, "No, these are our friends and neighbors. They've known us all our lives. We'll be fine. It's you kids running off to who knows where we'll have trouble." Shortly after he and Hannah and a few cousins left, the rest of his family and the several thousand other Jews in the area were placed in a slave labor camp and then murdered. This story, when very infrequently referred to, was always presented as something that happened to your father's family. It wasn't until in my 40s, a couple of years after moving up to Mendocino County, when I held our Torah in our shul, a Torah that had been brought back by Karen and Norm Rosen after it was freed from a museum of an extinct race in Czechoslovakia, that I suddenly felt and understood for the first time that this was something that had happened to my family.
Assignment 2, a person now dead who influenced you greatly. Paulette.
Pearl. I hadn't started school, and some evenings my mother would let me walk down the road to Joan and Linda's house to wait for them and my sister Gail to get off the school bus so we could play together. Pearl was their housekeeper, and I liked her. She was nice to me and seemed to welcome my company. She worked for Jesse, a tenant tobacco farmer, because he was divorced and raising his girls on his own. Joan and Linda were a little older than Gail and me, but they were our closest neighbors, and we spent a lot of time together because we worked for Jesse in the summer putting in tobacco. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen with Pearl when I heard the school bus. I ran to the front door, but the bus didn't stop. I went back to the kitchen and told Pearl that it wasn't them. It was the N-word school bus, I told her. Pearl put down the dish towel and turned toward me. She put her hands on my shoulders and leaned in close to my face, locking my eyes with hers. "You mean the colored school bus," she told me. We both took a big breath, and I said, "Yes, ma'am, that's what I mean." I don't remember much else about that afternoon. I'm sure the older girls came home and we had some Pepsi and probably some Ritz crackers. And Gail and I walked the 200 yards back up the dirt road to our house. Life seemed to proceed just as it always had been. But I was changed.
Assignment 3, a death story in the style of a writer you admire. Anita.
Rue Bran, written in the style of Edgar Allan Poe. A fire bore wings for the phoenix, beginning anew. When the flames dissipate, it will crumble into ash. All that begins is destined to end, a notion most find appalling. I, however, have accepted this as my desolate fate the day I packed my unlit torch and fuel. Hearken to me when I ask, what is wrong with taking back what was stolen from you? Would it possess me to commit such an immolation is nothing that was pulled from thin air, but an intolerable wound that digs deep with each passing year. The house I once lived in hasn't moved, and it is impossible to say whether it ever will. An untouched pie sits on the dust-collected table, covered in mold and maggots. Portraits line the wall, all of which are sullen. A scythe with dried blood lays on the floor, a grotesque reminder of a day that has stood still for me. A quivering boy and his scythe, a hideous, frenzied rendition of my father, one that wields a double-barrel shotgun. He was going to kill me. He had meant to kill me that day like he had killed my mother. I only did what I had to do in order to survive, so why paint what I've done differently? That I, a child no less, would commit such an appalling act. Perhaps I have gone mad, and this is the only way I can justify what I have done. The answer to that very question haunts me day and night. One cannot justify this without a lingering sense of guilt. Perhaps I am culpable, even as a child. If I had done what needed to be done to protect both my sister and I, why must I prove to myself that I am clean of sin? That I am not one most should express repugnance for? Yet the answer I seek will not be one I find today. I will allow the flames to lick the portraits and smolder every remnant of this crypt. No more shall a ghastly depiction of that day haunt me. From here on, I take control over my narrative. I will make the clocks move again, and one day, when this home is rebuilt, I will grow old and die here too.
Valerie?
Written in the style of William Shakespeare, this is Sonnet 155. The Queen, my mother, did not tell the truth. There is a willow grows aslant a brook, yet I now divulge. What is the use? For gone are those who should partake a look. Who is your mother, and where did she go? Your complex with abandonment was real. Brother, father, lover, too much woe. I won't believe your own life did you steal. She wed an uncle and she killed a king. Seems, madam, in her own greed, couldn't stop. Hoping upon your hand I'd place a ring, and belief that from a willow you did drop. 'Twas not a willow, but a queen's repair, who took the life of my sweet lady fair.
Assignment 4. Look around your home as if you were diagnosed with 6 months to live. Kate.
Last look. As I walk through my beloved home, I am seen through different eyes. The initial shock of my 6-month diagnosis is wearing off somewhat, but I have not returned to my normal state. I feel as if I am floating or moving underwater. My home, a vast aquarium. The objects catching my attention have shifted as if my brain rewired. I am not seeing and thinking about functionality, like the paint touch-up needed, Or should I rearrange the living room furniture for Christmas? By which window should I set up the puzzle table? And what am I going to do with that mound of apples from our overly prolific tree? No, not those things. My eyes skitter away from photos of loved ones on display. Pain. Rather, they rest on objects that have a memory attached. Handmade gifts from children, Christmas and birthday presents from over the years, travel memories. Shopping with my mother in the little French store as she helped me collect pottery. Even gifts I bought myself. My husband's art, my flower posters. Attached to each is a sweet memory of those moments when these things entered my life. I slide out to the garden. My heart clutches a little as I whisper goodbyes to my roses, petunias, and green beans, knowing this is their last season I will see, and mine as well.
Assignment 5, gallows humor. Elizabeth.
Breaking news, Elizabeth Raybee drew till she dropped. Or should we say, tiled and glassed until she passed? Glued as long as she could, jeweled and beaded till her strength receded. Drew portraits all night as her veins grew tight, made art and music till dawn. Then her spirit moved on. The event Raybee pulled together for the arts community after 3 years at rest took its toll. And we don't mean by license recognition. We mean by stopping to pay the price. She truly put her heart into it, as she always did, but generally that term was used metaphorically. This time it was visibly. Alas, all the muscle and blood and brain going into drawing forth artists, organizing musicians and poets, pulling forth prizes, maneuvering meals from the masses to feed the forces, drained the swamp, broke the arteries, and literally popped the metaphoric cork. The physicians called to determine the cause of death couldn't tell if it was from the several artists who dropped out after their names were printed out and distributed, possibly aided by the musicians who waited till the last minute to say if they were coming and when. The sound system difficulties disrupting the schedule, the two poets who just didn't show up, the stress caused by putting two of the artists' tables right next to each other, not knowing that they'd had a disagreement that had made them stop speaking to each other 6 years earlier. Other participants made it clear that Elizabeth did truly enjoy her 25 hours of arting and chatting with visitors while seeing art being made by others interspersed with singing and playing her ukulele. But playing the ukulele may have had some part in this as well. It made it difficult for her to sing and play and keep eye contact with her audience without losing her place in the song. Spending an hour and a half helping the new bookkeeper organize the donations, both paid and pledged to each artist, but now needing to be properly arranged for collection and distribution in the list of post-event tasks after not having slept for 30 hours, but not being able to leave or nap until the last two artists finished making their art 5 hours later, was likely a major contributor. And not to be confused with the major contributions of donations, which were an exciting joy, though maybe that high level of excitement made her blood run too quickly or dance too swiftly. Then the packing and the schlepping of chairs and tables, leftover food and boxes, organizing and directing the helpers and cleaning, combined with drinking 4 times her usual amount of lovely black oat coffee, was considered a major factor as well. But Raybee's final collapse was as she scrubbed the orange and green paint off the carpet where her dear pal of 4 decades had painted in those colors for 24 hours. The Home Sweet Home mosaic she worked on that day will be used to mark her burial site as she is welcomed into the ungrouted section of art heaven. May she rest in peace.
Keith.
Dr. Hodges' death dirge. I didn't know him. Although he was our family doctor, I never met him. I sure as hell did meet his ham-fisted orderlies. It took 2 of them to hold me down for my diphtheria booster shot. I was 4, and I bit and scratched. Was that why Dad took to calling me Tiger? I knew Dr. Hodges only from the legend of his benighted curse that dogged him and his nurses and patients and anyone else within earshot of that whistled dirge. He'd not a clue of the panic he'd incurred. Medical chart tucked firmly under his arm, jauntily admitting new patients into the spick and span, spanking new linoleum hallways of his shiny private practice. He was oblivious to the abject fear he could arouse, his nurses silently praying under their breaths that this was not one of those days. At the dinner table, Mom chuckled as Dad added how he'd overheard one of the nurses whisper from the side of her mouth, "He's doing it again." As the other nurse sighed, "Oh dear God, who is it this time?" Suddenly, across the dinner table, I saw my mother's smile getting wider and my sister squirming with anticipation as Dad began. One of the younger nurses froze in her tracks. Her tray full of medicine hit the linoleum floor, sounded like an M16, damn near started a stampede. My mom and sister were rollicking in their chairs, uncontrollable, both of them now pointing at me with my quizzical expression of clueless prepubescence lighting up my cheeks and ears, as Dad exclaimed, "I thought I was dead, damned, and delivered. This went on for weeks. It made me clammy. I kept thinking of sitting at tea in London during the Battle of Britain. Believe you me," he added for emphasis, "it's damn difficult keeping a stiff upper lip when everyone else teapots are clattering with the sound of distant thunder. You get that ashen look, like a death's head mask. I didn't know which end was up, just that my number might well be. So it was with Dr. Hodges' whistling. It was just an innocent little ditty, Dad went on. Suddenly, I heard my mother's slowly humming as my sister joined in, and then Dad accompanying. From this valley they say you are going. I will miss your bright eyes and sweet smile, for they say you are taking the sunshine that has brightened our pathway a while. We all cracked up, the hair prickling on the back of my neck as I finally got the joke.
Assignment 6, write your own eulogy or obituary. Mary.
A eulogy for Mary Hatfield. The cremated remains of Mary Elizabeth O'Hara Cox White Hatfield lie in the Russian River Cemetery in Ukiah, California. Mary chose this spot with her husband, James Hatfield. She wanted to be next to him and to be able to see high school students go by, enjoy the deer population, and provide a particular location for her family to visit, including her beloved exchange students. Mary was 74. This location is far afield from her beginnings. Born in the Children's Hospital in Buffalo, New York, Mary was adopted at birth by Walter and Sally Cox from Ludlow, Pennsylvania, a town not too far from the New York border. Mary enjoyed a happy childhood until her adoptive mother was killed in a car crash. Before that accident, though, Mary led an almost fairy tale childhood. She and her older brother John had great times jumping on the feather beds, sending feathers to places not found for months. Games of war would go on far after bedtime, heaps of quilts keeping their secrets safe. The dog, who was expressly forbidden to get on the bed, was always in the bed when the lights were finally out. Mary used to tell stories of the late summer months helping on the farm, King's Dairy. She would ride along on the tractor that pulled the hay baler. Mary remembers standing on the hitch, holding onto the metallic rim of the tractor seat while her mother operated the machine. Once the hay was in the barn, great squeals of laughter would come from the haymow, which had been outfitted with a rope swing. In the early mornings, the quiet and gentle Guernseys stood peacefully in their stanchions, unfailingly communicating with their brown, loving eyes and snotty kisses. Every day was milk day. In western Pennsylvania, in the Allegheny Forest, sledding is the best. Mary recalled bobsledding down the plowed service roads, running red racers down the steepest hill in town, and ice skating on the parts of 3 Mile Creek that seemed frozen enough. Oranges and tangerines, special fruit in the winter months, were their treats, peeling them as they thawed out, dripping snow clumps into the heat registers. Take no prisoners snowball fights and igloo making were required, taking over the freezer to make the colored snowballs hard and the forms for the igloo blocks right. When Sally was killed, it all changed. Mary and John were separated. John sent to Mercersburg Preparatory School at 14. Mary, at age 8, was sent to live with a family in Erie, Pennsylvania. At 68 years old, the children's father was unable to care for them in the family home, yet he continued to work. The years between 8 and 18 were for Mary a series of changing families, going to summer camp, and switching schools. When Walter finally retired, Mary was in her senior year of high school. She was called upon to nurse her ailing father through pleurisy and heart conditions. It was she who ran the household since her brother was now off to college. When her father died her senior year, she found herself living with a certain family who would become her forever family. Mary often described herself as a late bloomer. Despite such an unusual start in life, Mary made up for it. She married very early, just 20, without completing college. More than anything, Mary wanted to create her own family. Yet unwittingly, she was caught up in the youth revolution. She spent a year in the Yucatan, living in a Mayan Indian fishing village with her hippie husband. They grew their hair long, wore Mexican clothes, raised a small garden, ate red snapper every night, and smoked a kilo of marijuana. Back in the States, she and her husband started that family that Mary had dreamed of at 23. She raised her babies on goat's milk, as any self-respecting back-to-the-lander would. Life was growing and canning vegetables, raising animals for meat, baking, pickling, smoking bacon, cutting and stacking firewood, all the Little House on the Prairie chapters, including making cornhusk dolls. After 10 years of that, Mary had had enough. Mary started blooming herself when she rolled a lug box of tomatoes from the garden down the hill and took a job offer at the elementary school where the children were enrolled. She created a career for herself. Mary had her first paying job at age 33. Her elderly father had forbidden her to take an after-school job, babysit the neighbor's kids, or learn any sort of practical skill. He would respond to her requests to work in the Dairy Queen or even become a candy striper with the remark, "Cox women do not work outside the home." From homesteader to teacher's aide to credential teacher to a master's degree leading to a career as a high school counselor, Mary hopped, skipped, and jumped in a few short years. She retired 15 years ago after serving 15 years as dean at Ukiah High School. Mary immediately returned to the university, earning a second master's degree in family counseling. Had she had the opportunities denied by her father, Mary always believed she would have risen much higher in education. She just ran out of time. Postscript. Mary did have enough time at the end to locate 4 half-sisters and to have learned her birth mother's name, Estelle Louise O'Hara.
Keith.
Eulogy. He died in Andorra in the Spanish Pyrenees in 2050, an expat. He was born in Alameda, California at 10:52 a.m. in 1950, a Leo Libra Cancer Moon gave him a creative bent. His first words were, "Jesus, oh Jesus," after catching a fingerling in Niles Canyon Creek when he was 4. His first revelation, looking down at his left hand while sitting on the sidewalk in Castro Valley, being told by a voice that this hand was going to be with him all the rest of his life. His first trauma was feeling the sting on that same hand from the wooden ruler with the metal stripped down when his kindergarten teacher, Miss Pop, a Bavarian Catholic, determined to make him right-handed, left him, apparently, dyslexic. His first fear was when his mother saw a cut on his left hand and got him to tell on his kindergarten teacher. His first realization that his mother really was protective of him was when she stormed into Green Valley Elementary School and demanded to know, "Who's the bitch who thought she could lay a hand on my kid?" His first disappointment was when he asked his mom, "Why did I flunk kindergarten?" His first inklings of his artistic gifts was when, in the first grade, Bernie Jeffries showed him how to draw pipe cleaner people instead of stick people. From then on, he drew on every scrap of paper in the house. When he got a Zorro rapier with a piece of chalk on its plastic tip, no fence was safe on Buckeye Lane. His first feeling of elation was taking art class in high school and having teachers like Laura Stein, who fostered his interest in creative writing and provided a haven for his burgeoning poetic imagination. His art teacher, Janice Worthington, steered his artistic production away from profiles on the back of matchbooks to work that showed real talent, eventually winning him a summer scholarship to the California School of Arts and Crafts, affectionately nicknamed Farts and Laughs. From the psychedelic ambience of the San Francisco Bay Area, he was off to Goddard College with letters of recommendation from Herb Cole and Peter Marin, Northern California legends of liberal arts education. His predilection for learning was augmented through Goddard College's policy of choice for his senior study in the history of ideas. Doubtless, it was this factor that maintained his spirit in his postgraduate years. After graduating with a bachelor's degree from Goddard, he did not go on to the Iowa Writers' Workshop as planned. Instead, he switched from writing to painting. His studies in poetry did not satisfy him. The chief cause of this was a first-hand contact with a painting by Jackson Pollock. In the winter of 1971, while on Christmas holiday, he visited the Museum of Modern Art. After viewing firsthand works by 20th century modern European and American masters, he came upon number 1A, 1947. He wrote, "It was nervous lightning all up and down my spine. The sight of Pollock's drip and pour confirmed that a painting could be about painting and painting only, or everything that one might imagine before language." He said, "It left me thunderstruck." His original plan to be a poet seemed passé. How do things mean? In other words, how does this thingless motif attain meaning when all efforts to assign meaning through words have been stripped away? Abstract expressionism. But what might this ism be expressing? The power of being itself. And how without a focal point? No one had any idea. until 2019. It was fractals. It was the cosmic giggle, but he preferred mwahahaha to tee-hee-hee. His ashes are interred on Mars. R.I.P.? Maybe not. His epitaph? I told you so.
The final assignment, speaking from the grave, a past life, or your next life. Kate.
A good day to die. I am sitting on a rock that is warming these old bones, wearing a loincloth and moccasins. I look at my long, sinewy, withered muscles. In the far distance below, smoke lingers from the morning campfires of my people. There will be council today to decide whether to go in search of water or game. I sigh deeply and remind myself these are no longer my concerns. I've been here for 3 days, no food or drink, waiting to join my ancestors. It is a good day to die. I await my spirit guide to summon me, the same one who came to me when I was 3 years old. I feel myself slipping from my body a little. I lay down on my back on top of the big boulder and close my eyes. Before me, I see my ancestors who have finally arrived, reaching with their hands towards me to come to them. I have been hesitating because I want to be certain that I go in the right direction when I leave this old bag of bones. I lift out of my body, and my ancestors lead my spirit body up a path filled with brilliant, shining, white, round stones toward a pointed mountain peak. When we reach the top, I turn and look back down on my old body for one last time. It served me well. I realize that I will be born again into this tribe at a future time. However, there will not be the peace and harmony I experienced during this incarnation. But now, my focus returns to my current future. Turning back around with a whoosh, they are suddenly here. It is the bird tribe. They are brilliant, loving, welcoming, and I know they will lead me to where I want to go. Back to Great Spirit.
Anita.
Capybara reincarnation. I've never considered myself religious, nor do I know what happens when you die. However, there's always been one hope that I've had in death, and that is reincarnation. I believe in the paranormal, but even then, I hope that I can choose what happens to me when I die. When I die, I hope to be reborn as a capybara, the largest of the rodent species. There's something so fulfilling in life being a capybara. They're so carefree, look like weird dogs, like attentions and pets, and get along well, for some reason, with alligators. They don't seem to really care if there's a pelican gnawing at its butt. Nor do they care if they're about to lay in a large pile of mud. They just flop around on their sides and call it a day. It's hard to look at this creature and think it belongs to the same family as possums, rats, squirrels, and hamsters. However, they're closely related to guinea pigs, just massive. When I'm feeling down, I watch videos of these creatures. They're so peaceful and funny looking. They get along well with other animals. You can bring them around cats, dogs, and mice. The most they'll do is smell them, maybe steal food from their bowls, and lay in their beds. Do they bite or scratch them? No, not even in defense. Not to mention the funny sounds they make. The long, drawn-out little squeak. Not to mention that although I've said they look like weird dogs, they're so simple. The humps in their backs, the flipper-like feet they have, how small their ears are, and how large their faces are. Perhaps when I die, I want to be reborn to look as simple as that and go about life just so peacefully.
Valerie? To the grave.
Thank you. You're very good at your job. By the way, you should say yes to him. He really does love you, and he was telling the truth. God bless you to that young woman riding her bicycle there. Or Gesundheit. Whatever. You can't hear me, can you? This feels like one of those dreams where I'm being chased and trying to scream, and all I can come up with is a meager, unintelligible whimper. Hey, you guys, pay attention! You're going to want to see this. Amazing. Oh, I like the lavender. Thanks. cherish you too. And singing. Thanks for singing like I... Yes. Hold my hand. I do look calm, don't I? Oh, if you only knew. And now I finally know. Well, almost. I'm almost there. What the fuck was that? Oh. That's better. Mom? Dad? Danny? Grandma? Grandpa, Mom, Pop, Uncle Art, Uncle Hubie, Aunt Reid, oh. Joe, Mary, I'm so sorry you drowned. I thought so. Glad. I'm there. I'm here. We're all here, there. This is it. This is awesome! I feel like this feels like... Oh my God! This feels like I imagined it would... Holy shit, I'm really dead. Oh. That's singing. Thanks for singing. I don't feel my body anymore. Well, I do, but it's like dancing and flying at the same time. Skipping. Little Valerie's skipping. Hello? Yes. I know. This just in, live on the scene, Valerie O'Riordan of Upper Lake died from happiness at her lake house on the 12th of November, and never at the age of 100. She is immediately survived by her awesome children, Ian and Rose, who she will cherish forever and a day. Valerie was born in Long Beach as the youngest of 3 children to a creative, funny mother and a strict policeman father. She earned degrees from Long Beach City College, Cal State Long Beach, and the American Conservatory Theater, where she joined Actors Equity after performing in her controversial thesis project in Angels in America. Valerie was the first female drama director at Reardon High School, and after 22 years retired happily to Lake County. An avid believer in guardian angels and life after death, Valerie now sees clearer than ever before. And now, back to Ellen and Deb, making elf cookies with Martha Stewart in the studio.
And now, our epitaphs.
I'd better get a hit country song out of growing up this way.
Junkyard, warehouse, farm, mosaic, guru, goddess, queen. Hey, I've been called worse.
And now, she knows.
I told you so.
She's not really dead.
In the words of John Mulaney, you could pour soup on my lap and I'd apologize.
She bloomed wherever she was planted.
I'm fine. Really now.
To be continued.